The River. I'm Chris Holden, filling in for Murray Calder this week, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Adrienne Spring. How are you doing?
I'm vertical. How are you?
Thank you again for joining us today. Adrienne is an exotic dancer, adult entertainer, stripper. We've been conversing.
Well, we have.
We've been talking about the industry, the adult entertainment industry in general, dancing in general. Before we left for the break, you'd made an interesting comparison about exploitation in general.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was, to me, such an interesting overriding theme here, is that people tend to typically look at the adult entertainment industry as exploitative of the girls that work in the industry, of maybe the purveyors of the entertainment itself as well. As you mentioned, though, there's exploitation in workforces and industries almost globally.
Oh, yeah.
You've worked in retail previously. You've had experience in other jobs before doing this one. How do you balance out the exploitation side of things? Do you feel now that you were more taken advantage of in your prior life, or do you feel more taken advantage of these days?
In my experience, this is something that's a really sort of a hot button topic. The most exploitive, abusive job I've ever had in my life was as a caregiver. Like I'd much rather have my naked bum in somebody's face, and them, going, "Oh my God, I love your bum. It's so juicy. It's so beautiful. It's so round. It's so soft," versus, have literally somebody pissing in their bed. And then, you get woken up out of like no sleep, and then you have to clean the bed, wipe the person down, and, either, pee or excrement. And literally you have to do that on like I wasn't getting paid because it was basically like a family member. But the amount of, because I talked to a lot of the caregivers that would come in like blocks of time, because like I was exhausted. I was completely burned out. I'd gained 20 pounds. I had, massive mental breakdown because it's exhausting. And the one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the, care workers, nurses, like the really sort of grunge end of the healthcare industry, those are the most exploited people on earth, pretty much. Besides full-time parents. But the thing that you run into is that a lot of those people, like, they can strike, but a lot of the people that employ them want the biggest bang for the minimum buck. They're not going to be hired if they want, like an actual living wage, for the amount of hours they're working. Because when, my mom was in the hospital, she was in the hospital twice. One of them, there was like a month she was in the hospital for an injury, which shouldn't have happened. She should have walked out. That didn't happen, but that's a whole other discussion. And then she ended up, I was the caregiver sort of in the block of time between hospital and then the next hospital visit, because she broke her other arm. But the overhearing, because I would go in every day for like, the allotted, you couldn't go for more than a certain amount of hours. And then I would overhear a lot of the nurses talking about, oh, I can't take a pee break. I can't take a snack break. I got, X person on floor 5, had some sort of an issue. Like, I don't understand the code words they were using, but you'd hear, the stuff they were dealing with. And when somebody was like, being belligerent, being violent, being, whatever they were doing, like the person had no option. They couldn't just yeet out and go, "I need a break, sorry." Like, no, you got to deal with that stuff. You got to clean the stuff off the floor. You got to deal with the person that throttled you, that punched you out, that, stabbed you with a needle, that did whatever the heck they did. Like, those are the most abused workers on earth.
And so, vastly underappreciated.
They're ignored. They're most of the public just ignores them. Like they're treated as like, garbage basically by a lot of the public. Like, unless you're coming in on a gurney, then, oh my God, my savior, then, we dismiss them. A lot of blue collar workers are dismissed.
I'd asked you before the break about surprises that you'd had in the industry, whether they be good ones or bad ones necessarily. But what have you found that's surprised you maybe the most?
Surprising. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't really think, well, I guess the biggest surprise for me is the hypocrisy of society. The fact that we tend to be demonized, dismissed, and used as scapegoats for a lot of societal problems when and this is something that I mentioned to Vice at one point, and they weren't too happy about it. But the fact that a lot of whenever like an issue comes up of like an exotic dancer being either abused, killed, whatever, the onus of responsibility is put on the industry, when the fact is that the person that walked into that door likely has a record of abusive behavior, likely has a record of violence, and has likely been ignored because A, they're white collar, B, they're in a position of power, C, people as a whole don't like to admit that abusers and problematic individuals in their society that are their husbands, brothers, sons, neighbors, their behavior is the cause of the problem. Don't foist off society's issues on my industry, because yes, we are, yes, we're nude, yes, we're whatever, we're entertainers, but the thing is that the issues of society as a whole have not disappeared. They've existed since time began.
It tends so often to seem like the things that are looked upon as society as a vice to, whether it be get through the day or that get blamed for. I'm looking at gambling, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Gambling takes a brunt of societal blame for various things, but I think it's a similar thing you're saying, that the thing that leads someone into a problem gambling or an addiction with it and having to go to the casino and spend $1,000 on a daily basis. Yeah. That didn't begin there. No. That began somewhere else. This is just where it's coming to now. Do you find them working in the environment? The majority of clients coming in, do they seem like they're deeply troubled problem people, or do they seem like they're regular people having a good time for the evening?
Well, the thing is that I started in locations in Northern Canada, like Smithers, also in Vancouver Island, like Port Alberni. I worked in Prince Rupert a lot, Penticton, Prince George, Fort St. John. Like I worked in, very sort of obscure Northern Canadian, like very sort of, hard to reach, unless you're working there, jobs. Or not, locations. And the thing is that I find a lot of people are there for entertainment. Like there's a lot of, like I said, with, blue collar versus white collar. White collar I had more in Calgary. Calgary and Vancouver were the kind of heavier, kind of body count, literally, for that sort of demographic. So I started with, iron workers, forestry workers, mining workers. Those were the predominant sort of audience members that I had in my sort of locations that I worked, and I found them mostly, they're just on the way to work, on the way back from work, they're just de-stressing, decompressing, relaxing, chilling, because I think a lot of like what we're dealing with, the incel culture, is the lack of sort of emotional understanding from the public that men also like to congregate and have fun and relax. And it's always sort of the belief that men don't have emotions or can't really deal with their emotions. And a lot of time they have youths, bars, saloons, just sort of places to relax and sort of interact with each other. It doesn't really matter which culture, with which religion, wherever you go in the world, that will happen. You go to, the Middle East and you look at like hookah, you look at, whatever, like belly dancing, you look at all these kind of things. It doesn't matter where you go. People will always want to interact.
Talks a lot about stereotypes through this show, and I think that's been an overriding or underlying theme here.
Yeah.
And what do you think? What's your take from the inside of the industry on the stereotypical view that society has of the industry and the girls that work in it versus the reality from seeing it on the inside?
I think the stereotype is, slovenly, sort of lack of education, drug addicted, alcoholic, disastrous messes. And yes, I have encountered people that are a disastrous mess. At one point I was working in, southern BC, and one of my colleagues was so drunk, I had to literally pour her into her clothing, which was something else when somebody's kind of, listing to the side, starboard, like Titanic on a bad day off. But, you kind of have to find the shoes and make sure that the feet, don't hit you in the nose. But I mean, the thing is that how many, how many first responders, sorry guys, don't come at me, but how many first responders are dealing with incredibly high stress, and they are self-medicated? How many plumbers and how many electricians and whatever, the amount of civilian jobs that are high stress or high pressure, how many of them are working, or living, I should say, 100% sober lives. I think the thing that you run into is that everybody in life, when you deal with high stress, you will reach towards, something to de-stress. That's a human nature. We always try to balance, because psychologically you can't, people, because I don't do drugs, I don't smoke, I don't drink. And they're always like, what do you mean you do this job sober? And it's like, well, it's a choice. It's hard. It's a choice. I can understand why somebody would reach for the alcohol. For me, I just read, fan fiction, and and I'm just a readaholic. I'll look at like furniture restoration videos for fun, or like I'll visit like architecture, and go to Europe and just kind of have downtime and chill. Yeah, I mean, another thing that I always find ridiculous whenever somebody's like, oh, stereotypes of strippers, is how does your daddy like to think about this? How do your parents like to think about this? You must have daddy issues. And the one thing that I find interesting on that topic is that how many people overall have daddy issues? How many people come from stable families? How many come from, either abusive parents, dysfunctional parents, etc.? I think, and this is sort of a controversial viewpoint, which I think is accurate, is I think 80% of the world comes from damage. It doesn't matter what livelihood you come from, that's the norm. Because a lot of people are either, their parents were either refugees. My mom was a refugee. My dad's German, came from, Germany in the 1940s and 50s. So, do the math on that. Like it's the amount of people that, come from the religious backgrounds, whether you have sexual, self-hatred, recrimination, that's a huge thing. So the amount of people that will come into strip clubs and be judgmental is a lot. But the thing is that it's up to them. You come in, you have problems, you deal with them. Mm-hmm. If you want a therapist, we're here, with we can entertain you. That's fine. But if you have issues, it's not our responsibility to unravel your ball of yarn. Mm-hmm. There's therapists for that job.
Do you see though what you do is a therapy that some people could come in and treat it that way?
A lot of people do. That's the thing. I mean, I've talked to God knows how many people. I mean, it's funny because, not funny, I shouldn't say that, but it's interesting how a lot of people will come into the club, and because the thing is that people are told, oh, go to a therapist. But how many people, like, I think it's more acceptable for women to go to a therapist because it's like, oh yes, girl time over a martini, versus, guys are a lot more, I guess, not really demonized, but I guess they're not as respected. I'm definitely missing a terminology there, for going to get help. Right.
It's another one of the stereotypes.
Yeah, it's a stigma for guys to be like, oh, I'm gonna get help with my stuff. I think this issue has especially been brought up now more in society. The whole issue of like, men, quote unquote, man up, be a man. Then it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? You look in the situation of, I mean, that's, to tangent on that topic. There's a difference between, smaller town locations versus, Calgary and Vancouver. When smaller town locations, at one point, this is one of my classic stories where I was sitting in front of the bar, older gentleman, younger gentleman, and then the older gentleman sort of leaned over me and was like, "Don't you try anything, I know your mother," to the young guy. And it's like, when you have mentorship in the audience and in communities, then men and boys are less likely to become, problematic. It doesn't have to be a family member. It just has to be like a part of the community. Then if you're in, a place, larger city where there's a complete dissociation among audience members and somebody can be an abusive, problematic prick, in the bar and nobody really knows them, so nobody's going to hold them accountable. Like that's a huge part of society overall that we don't really talk with enough.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Adrienne Spring, and thanks again for being here.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thanks everyone for listening. This is Town Hall on 88.7 The River.
Thank you.